Well, good morning and welcome to Coffee with the Pastor. We're here today, and for a few weeks we're going to be talking about grace and space. We live in a society today that has a hard time disagreeing. This cancel culture, this culture that doesn't want to allow discussion of differences of opinion. College campuses. This shocks me some because when I was going to college, that was a place where colleges were known as having free expression, where every view was to be talked about, debated, looked at, studied, defended. But today, some college campuses won't allow certain views on campus. Those of us who are Christians who use the Bible as our authority are having interesting discussions because we discuss with a culture today who by and large doesn't see the Bible as authoritative. They see the Bible as being an ancient book that's outdated, no longer authoritative to them. And so what we deal with is people who, if they think something or believe something or somebody's told them something or they like that, it really doesn't matter what the Bible says. And yet, we've been called to minister to this culture. We've been called to stand up for Christ. So how do we, as Christians who believe the Bible, take a strong stand upon the biblical principles, not compromising anything that we believe, and at the same time, dialogue with this cancel culture, this lost culture? And I've been using terms called grace and space. I think what we have to do is give others who disagree with us grace and space to disagree with us, but we also have to ask them to give us grace and space back to be able to dialogue with them based upon our beliefs in Jesus Christ and Him and His Word as authority. So what I've been doing, I've been showing how Jesus grew up in a society like that as well. There were those who were very secular with the Roman society. There were those who in the religious society were very religious, but they were not really capturing what God desired. And so Jesus dialogued with a whole group of folks in the society. Last week we looked at some people from the book of John. And I was just going to start moving towards, I want to do a whole week on Peter. I want to do a whole week on how Jesus dealt with his disciples. But I enjoyed having Jesus, how he dealt with individuals and maybe some groups last week in John. I thought I would just continue that for maybe this week, maybe some others, because he dealt with a lot of folks. But today, I thought we would start in the book of Mark, and this week we'll do some people he dealt with in Mark, and I'll start with Mark chapter 1. And we'll start with verse 40, where he deals with a man with leprosy. And it says, and this is Mark 1, verse 40, a man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you could make me clean." Jesus was indignant. He reached out his hand and touched the man. "I'm willing," he said, "be clean." Immediately the leprosy left him, and he was cleansed. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning, "See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. As a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere. So Jesus has a man with leprosy. Now, let me talk about leprosy for a minute. Even in the NIV translation, which I just read to you, it has a footnote that says, the Greek word traditionally translated leprosy was used for various diseases affecting the skin. Now, we have traditionally, and I've heard it preached most of my life, that these were lepers. They had leprosy. and they would compare it to modern day leprosy, which usually attacks the extremities. And of course, we know Mother Teresa was very instrumental in ministering to the lepers in Calcutta and all. But actually, in doing further study, I've kind of become convinced that it probably wasn't leprosy as we know it today. And there's a lot of people who feel like there was a skin disease back in Jesus' day that is no longer around today. Somehow it got eradicated, which is a good thing, but we don't have to deal with it. And I think there's been some compelling arguments for that, but I don't know. It might have been leprosy. Well, it doesn't matter, because what we do know is that a skin disease like that made a person unclean. And a person that was unclean could not be touched, and they were not to touch anyone. So that's really an amazing thing to think, that you're married and you become unclean, you cannot touch your spouse. You have a child and you become unclean, you cannot touch your child. Or if your child becomes unclean, you cannot touch them. It would be a horrible thing. And they become unclean, and we know that when they were walking down the road, if they see people, they have to go on the other side. If somebody gets close to them, they have to yell out, unclean, unclean, unclean. They had social distancing back then. They didn't wear masks or anything. They just yelled out, I'm unclean, stay away. So they stayed away. And so what a life that would be to have that disease, to be unclean. And so he comes up to Jesus and he said, if you wanted to, if you're willing, you could make me clean. And Jesus just looked at him, and he did something that he's not supposed to do. But remember, Jesus has the authority of God. And he reached out and he touched him, took his hand, and he touched the man. And he says, I'm willing, be clean. And at that instant, that skin disease went away. I find that interesting. Now, there's so much there, and I won't be able to do it this morning. But first of all, Jesus being willing to touch us when we're unclean and make us clean. That's a sermon in and of itself. Just when we sin, when we do things and we're unclean, and we ask Jesus to touch us, to make us clean again, and he will. And he cleansed him. And the other thing is Jesus is willing. I mean, I said, if you're willing, if you want to, you can do it. And Jesus said, I want to. I'm willing. And so he does it. And that's one of the ways I think we have to come to God ourselves and to Jesus, is realize that he's willing to touch us. He's willing to make us whole. He's willing to do things for us. He's not reluctant. We don't have to beg. We don't have to, quote, earn it. We just have to ask. And so he cleanses the man, and then he tells the man, don't go telling people about this. Now, why not? Well, in fact, he told him, he said, go show yourself to the priest. That's which, if this was in Galilee, he would have had to go to Jerusalem probably to do that. And that way he could have gotten to go to the temple again. He could have went and prayed. That's where they went and prayed. And he said, go do that. And he didn't do that. He just went and told everybody that Jesus made him clean. And because of that, Jesus couldn't even go into any of these towns or cities because they would block the way. So he had to stay out in lonely places, and they still found him. And there's a lot of discussion about why Jesus told people not to tell. And he's doing that all the time. He says, don't tell people who I am, or don't tell people what's happened here. And the reason is, I believe, is Jesus wanted to give his teachings. He performed miracles, performed them willingly, did it to show signs, did it to help people. But I really believe Jesus wanted to give his teachings, who he was and how we're to live, was most important. And he couldn't do that if people were just coming all the time to get miracles from him. And that's what happened. The man didn't listen to him, and so Jesus was blocked from staying in any towns. He had to stay out in lonely places. Well, today, as we get ready to go, I don't know what's going on in your life, but I want you to know that Jesus is willing to touch you, to cleanse you. And when we deal with these people who we disagree with and who do not share our Christian values or like that, you need to realize that Jesus is willing to touch them as well. And one of the things we need to do is to share Jesus with them. And as I often say, not that we have arrived ourselves, but that we're one beggar trying to show another beggar where he can find some bread. Hope you have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.